Hello and welcome back. We have some fantastic sessions left today, so good to have you here in the room and also joining us virtually. Our next session is going to be focusing on Action 2. So we've already had a deep dive into Action 1. We're now moving on to Action 2, which is curbing emissions from advertising production. And I'm going to be handing over to a live video link. We've got some guests with us, Nicolas, Ella, Joe and Traci, who will be exploring Action 2 with us this afternoon. So I'm hoping that they will be popping up there. We can see them. So over to you.
Thanks, Geeta. Thank you for that. Hi and welcome everyone. So I'm Joe Fenn. I'm the project director for AdGreen, and thanks for joining us today for this session as part of the summit. We're going to run you through the things that AdGreen offers to support those engaging with Action Point 2 of AdNet Zero, which, as Geeta said, is reducing emissions from advertising production. And we're bringing together 3 fantastic panelists who have all led the charge for environmental sustainability within their organisations. And with highlights from the first full year of data from the Carbon Calculator being published in a couple of months, I will also share some insights from the hundreds of completed footprints we now have in our dataset. We are quite tight on time for this session, so we probably won't get to any questions, but if you do have anything you want to know about, the answer's probably on the website. We can email the team on info@weareadgreen.org. So you'll be hearing from our brilliant panel shortly, but first I wanted to introduce myself and the work of AdGreen. As some of you may know, prior to leading the project, I worked in advertising production for almost 10 years, and I started my green production journey by facilitating on-site recycling and encouraging attendees to bring their own water bottles. The response from those on my shoots was positive, but I wanted to take it further, and this is when I reached out to BAFTA's Albert team, which you already heard about earlier. They support the film and TV industry to reduce the environmental impact of their productions. And they have over a decade of data at their fingertips from those productions and lots of interesting insights. So the average CO2 equivalent emissions generated while producing 1 hour of television content was 5.7 tonnes during 2021's dataset. To give some context, according to How Bad Are Bananas by Mike Berners-Lee, the average UK citizen's annual footprint in 2020, when the book was published, was around 13 tonnes, so 5.7 compared to 13. During the production of this average 1 hour, the majority of emissions came from people transport and energy use for the various spaces that are involved in creating a TV show. A tiny fraction of the total emissions generated were from disposal. So Albert's data taught me that recycling on set was really a drop in the ocean. And as the saying goes, and I know James already said it earlier, you can't manage what you don't measure. And this statement really underpins AdGreen's 2 aims. So enabling the advertising production community to measure, aim 1, and then to reduce their carbon emissions. And historically, this part of the advertising industry hasn't been measuring its impact, and in turn hasn't been able to make informed decisions to reduce the emissions generated. So at AdGreen, we offer training on why it's important to measure your production's impact and how to do it, a carbon calculator to facilitate that measurement, and a selection of resources to help you reduce your footprint once you know what it is. Everything we do is offered free at the point of use, as we're funded by a levy on production spend, which is paid by advertisers. Since launching the AdGreen Carbon Calculator in September 2021, the team have reviewed hundreds of footprints for stills, motion, and audio projects, which have been generated by the advertising production community around the world. It's these reviewed and completed projects which form our dataset. In preparing for the annual review's release, we've collated some initial insights based on the motion and stills projects which have been completed up until the end of last week, which I'm really excited to share with you now. We will become total data geeks at AdGreen Towers. So the completed projects, which originate from 11 different countries, account for 646 shoot days and total almost 1,700 tonnes of CO2. And this is for the projects ranging from the first one, which was completed in December last year, as I said, up until last week, so almost a full year. And the insights that we now have give us the opportunity to define a baseline for comparison in the coming months and years. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the data points right now. So the average project in the tool emitted 5 tonnes of CO2 equivalent in its production. And although that might not sound much different to the 5.7 tonnes that Albert quoted for their 2021 data, of the motion projects, many that we're talking about are only generating under a minute of content, not the hour used to quantify the Albert data. So if the projects creating a 60-second TVC, for example, were scaled up to an hour, they would be generating 60 times more. So though it sounds similar, it's actually quite different, or quite a lot more. We've also got quite a range of projects in the tool, just to give you a sense of kind of what's going into it. So we've got the smallest one is around 4 kilos, and that's a project generated from archive footage, meaning that there was just a small amount of post time, to the largest project in the tool, which is 109 tons, a large 5-day international shoot where 88 tons came from travel and transport, which was mostly flights. So a massive range in the tool currently. We can also see that travel and transport accounts for 63% of emissions across the completed projects, and disposal of waste a mere 0.3%. Emissions from the spaces used across the projects accounted for just under a quarter of the total. So this echoes Albert's findings and shows us that focusing on how crew, client, cast, and product are transported should be top of the list when it comes to making reduction decisions, followed by how spaces used are powered, i.e. whether they're on renewable energy or not. It's also worth noting that the average footprint for an adaptation is 0.18 tonnes versus the average footprint for creating original content, which is 5.3 tonnes. So you can see that adapting something old is obviously much less carbon intensive, than creating something new, as you probably expect. So I really hope those initial insights were enough to get you excited for the annual review in January, where we'll have even more detail and some graphs and sort of general more visualizations of that data. I appreciate it's quite difficult to just sort of take in via my voice, but we'll have a lot more in that annual review. So do sign up for our newsletter to find out when that's coming. And this is really just the beginning. So over the next 12 months, we'll be working hard to expand our new training, which just launched a couple of weeks ago, adding new modules around using the tool more quickly and understanding how to interpret the data. And we'll also be making some tweaks to the tool to improve the user experience. So environmental sustainability is a topic that can often overwhelm us, especially when the average person is just beginning to get carbon literate. We are here to guide advertisers, creative agencies, and production companies as they take their first step into production measurement, and to support them to continue producing highly creative and innovative ads on a reduced carbon budget. So with that in mind, let's meet our panel. Today we've brought together people from each part of the advertising production process. So first we have Traci Dunne, Global Director of Industry Relations at APR, to give us a client perspective. You can give us a wave, Traci. Hello. Then I'm joined by Nicolas Bordas, Vice President International at TBWA Worldwide, to talk about how creative agencies can handle the challenge. And finally we have Gancarz, freelance producer and EP who has previously worked at Spindle, Endemol and Hogarth, who can speak to the on-the-ground challenges. So welcome everyone. I hope you're all doing well in your respective remote locations. It's a little strange in this format. So first of all, I'd like to hear about your experiences so far. So firstly, Traci, I'd love to hear how APR are working with brands to sort of embed sustainability into their processes and how sort of you're helping to do that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess the reality is that most brand and procurement teams that we speak to are really still at the very kind of beginning of their journey, still trying to work out how they can ensure that their marketing and production operations are becoming more sustainable. And as we've heard repeatedly across all of the speakers today, the time for action is now. We need to move past that theory and into practice. But many don't have the expertise really that's required to create a carbon reduction strategy or really even work out where to start. And I guess that's really where we're finding we're able to step in and plug that gap at the moment. Plugging the kind of joining the dots between those corporate sustainability targets that are set at an organizational level and what marketing and production can do to support and contribute to those targets is a key factor we find. And so that's where we start. We carry out a corporate targets assessment, find out what we're committing to at an organisational level, and then try to develop a strategy and a roadmap to ensure that production and marketing are contributing to those targets by the time that they need to be met. And data here is obviously a key contributor to any reduction strategy programme that we put together for a client, and this is where the AdGreen carbon calculator comes in. As a founding member of the AdGreen initiative, we believe that having the existence of a calculator that was developed specifically for use in advertising production really does have the power to truly revolutionise the way we produce across the board in our industry. And so we advocate the use of the carbon calculator in any program that we put together for a client, in order to provide us with the data that we need to define and develop that strategy, but also to help us understand where we need to focus our efforts to drive that behaviour change. So the output is twofold for us. And finally, you mentioned the carbon benefits of that asset reuse. And this is definitely something that we make sure that we build into a program, because the fact that you don't have to reshoot every piece of content that you need, and making sure that there's the governance around that to be able to reuse is really key for a program as well.
Yeah, some really good points there. And I think, as we sort of said, the being able to have that first step and knowing what your impact is before you even get started is definitely the sort of the best place to start. So,
Absolutely.
Nicolas, with that in mind, I imagine that embedding new processes across a large organisation with multiple regional offices is quite challenging. How are you approaching upskilling the sort of appropriate staff in your different offices with regards to carbon literacy, and what have been, or what do you think will be, the easy wins for you?
Yes, it's challenging, of course. The scaling is challenging, but we are a little bit used to scale digital tools as we did for the adoption of Teams or Workplace within our organization. So we decided to adopt the same kind, I would say, of process that we did successfully for other tools. We were lucky enough that TBWA London has already started to use it. And what we have announced 2 weeks ago is that now the tool will be adopted by all TBWA agencies all over the world. And we did use first a couple of pilot countries. So it was New York, Paris, and London mainly. But the good news is that some other countries heard about it. So we're asking why them and not me. So this was a kind of nice feeling, having Australia, New Zealand, Germany saying we want to be part of the experimentation. So we just told them, wait a couple of weeks, but now it's done. So we also decided to have one person in charge at the global level to be sure that we'll be able to answer questions, accelerate the implementation. And so we are just rolling out. And at this moment, by the way, we did test with a couple of countries. And you were talking about the huge production, international production. It was us, I must admit that. So when I presented that, showing it was a 100 tons carbon footprint, meaning the equivalent in 1 year for an office like Switzerland, people suddenly realize that there was a lot to do in that scale. So sometimes bad examples can be good in order to move fast. And of course, the training tools that were already available and that are now available will help a lot. So hopefully the scaling should go well.
That's great to hear. I think, it's really good to have that internal super user if you've got that resource, because it really helps us as well to kind of have that one contact that we know is someone that other people can turn to if they need that support, in their own time zone or their own language, for example. Thanks, Nicolas. And Ella, I know you've been using the tool quite a bit at your various sort of freelance postings. It'd be great to hear a little bit about any challenges you faced, and also how you've used the calculator's data, as sort of Nicolas just alluded to inform production decisions either before a shoot began or perhaps from one shoot to the next, having that sort of context of previous jobs that you've looked at.
Yeah, so the first part of questions were the biggest challenges. Usually the biggest challenge is when we have a script that we have to shoot that has a lot of carbon emissions baked in. But then, because thanks to the calculator, we've learned where the carbon emissions can be the worst and how can we reduce them. So this is where we start making decisions on the crew. Maybe sometimes we can use local crew as opposed to flying a lot of people abroad. Seeing if we can try remote shooting or traveling by train to some locations. So personally, I had to shoot in Paris, so instead of flying, Eurostar to Paris was much more environmentally friendly. So decisions like that. Sometimes what is challenging is obviously the nature of the production industry means working with freelancers, with a lot of different people of different specialisms. And because of that, we decided to dedicate a lot of time into training freelancers that work with us before the shoots, so that everyone is educated to have the sustainability at heart. And for example, by ordering a vegan or vegetarian catering on set, by choosing materials that are sustainable, or reducing or reusing materials, repurposing props and wardrobe, whatever is possible after the shoot. So all decisions like that also were we had those learnings after using the calculator and after AdGreen trainings. So it's fantastic that there is a resource guide that we can always share to, for example, people new to sustainable practices. We can always send a link, they can have a read. Second thing that we can do, we can just invite them to training sessions that are free. So it's a fantastic tool for production companies to invite people who they want to work with to the training, so that they are more aware. Another maybe not necessarily a challenge, but something that made me think personally, is the fact of like collecting the data throughout the process. So it's important to have a person in charge who makes sure that the data is being collected throughout the production process, not only when the shoot is finished, because sometimes it's really hard to get hold of data. And yeah, using the calculator definitely informed a lot of our decisions. So probably like the best example is the Greenpeace Shark, the production we done with Spindle. We received that brief, so we also did the creative development for the campaign, but we knew that we have to be particularly careful with carbon emissions for such clients such as Greenpeace, and we were making all our decisions and calculating them at the same time on AdGreen calculator. So we opt for a 3D shark that didn't require filming, going to remote locations, and overall the whole campaign produced less than one European flight, CO2 emissions less than one European flight, which is fantastic. So and we keep learning and keep using AdGreen calculator to learn on our own productions.
That's great. Thanks, Ella. And probably better for the sort of insurance angle as well, not having a real shark on the shoot.
Certainly, yes. Yeah.
Probably safer for all involved. So I know we're not got loads of time left, but I just wanted to ask a couple of extra questions. So Traci, obviously COP's happening this week, and with sort of continued focus on reporting emissions and publishing reduction plans, how are APRs sort of helping clients prepare for this with regards to sort of emissions from their advertising activities? Obviously, we know for a lot it's a small portion of what they're doing, but a portion nonetheless.
Absolutely. And we've heard just today about the importance of being aware that ESG reporting, and just now actually from Steve at Planet Mark, not Mark at Planet Earth, explains that in order for an organisation to be able to meet a net zero target, scopes 1, 2, and 3 need to be measured, reported, and validated. And so obviously scope 3 is where marketing and production squarely fits for most organizations. And so we're spending a lot of time actually making sure that these facts land with our clients and ensure that we can try and help them get ahead of that and avoid a mad scrabble for data they simply don't have as they start to approach their own target completion dates and potentially haven't factored in those scope 3 relationships. And so there's one mantra. The key thing is to start to gather that data. And again, here we believe that this is where the AdGreen calculator again is going to really come into its own. Those that have embraced the use of the calculator early will be able to easily lay their hands on the data they'll need for those reporting requirements, but also to be able to demonstrate any reductions that they've managed to capture during that time since they've started gathering and tracking data in the calculator. However, we are also cognizant that for a brand, implementing the use of the calculator across multiple creative partners is a journey. It impacts working processes, and this requires a certain amount of change management. And so whilst we're getting to the point where all of this just comes naturally, we're finding that this is another area we're able to support our clients. We're able to go in there and help with that process re-engineering, make sure everybody knows what they need to do and at what point in the process they need to kick in. And that there's very, very clear client-driven guidance for their creative partners so that they know exactly what's expected of them.
Yeah, which kind of goes back to Nicolas's point earlier as well about sort of making sure you can get that embedded across a whole set of offices. So with that in mind, Nicolas, I'd like to come to you with my last meteor question before I ask each of my guests to give me their top tips. So you can think about that while Nicolas is speaking. Are there any sort of specific technological advancements you think will support a reduction to sort of production emissions going forward, sort of in the future, perhaps virtual production, that sort of thing that you might have seen or heard about or be planning to try?
Yes, for sure. At the moment where you start really looking in detail about the carbon emission of production, you start trying to find solutions. And of course, virtual production with the new generation of tools like Unreal Engine tool developed by gaming and so on is clearly the way we should explore all together. And when I say all together, it's really all together because we know that we cannot lower emissions just on one side. So it's clearly a collective task, if not a collective fight. And what is great with AdGreen, in my point of view, it's really a collective tool because it's really engaging the conversation with all the people around. Would it be advertisers? Would it be creative people within agency, account people, but also, of course, production company? And so around the table, suddenly you have interest for something people knows about, cares about, but not work that much about. And suddenly you look at details. So of course, we see how flight is important today. How transportation is low-hanging fruit where we can really change the game. But we can also open the door to a lot of other progresses. And this is why having this kind of tool and having this kind of conversation, for me, is first a kind of human advancement before being a technological advancement. But of course, technology can help, and especially virtual production has a lot of potential for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thanks so much. So before we wrap up, we can see our countdown rapidly moving downwards as they do. So I'm going to come to each of you for your top tip. If you're just getting started, perhaps our audience members are out there thinking, oh, I haven't really engaged with this yet. What should I kind of get on with first? What would be your top tips from your sort of own personal experience? I'll come to Ella first.
Well, my top tip would be to bear in mind that the biggest changes are made with small steps very often. The fact that through learning, through using AdGreen Calculator, sometimes I was really upset that there were still carbon emissions that we produced, and I was constantly trying to improve. But then I realized that is the process. That is what we actually should be doing. The world is not perfect, but with small changes, one day we will arrive where we want to be. So I just wanted to encourage everyone to just bear that in mind and make an effort, and even a small change matters.
Lovely. Thanks, Ella. Traci?
I would say implement use of the AdGreen calculator into your productions. Just start to gather and track that data. Work with experts to develop an achievable roadmap, which is key as well. But most importantly, just make a start, I would say.
Lovely. And lastly, Nicolas.
My one is very complementary to yours, which is get a demo. In fact, I had a couple of people who were quite skeptical about it, and I have also some agencies wanting to develop their own tools. Say, oh, I don't need another one. And when you get a demo, you see the tool is really very ergonomic, very well thought. Another very important advantage is the fact that it can be fed, the information can be fed by any parties, would it be production company, sound production companies, agencies, and so on. So I think the demo is really convincing.
Thanks, Nicolas. And it was lovely to give you that demo. We have actually moved that demo online, so you can see it at any time on demand. So do go to the website. We've got some new training modules. There's one all about us. So if you're unsure kind of what we've been talking about for the past half an hour, and you just need that bit of intro, there's a half hour, actually 25-minute run through there. And you can also take our first training module, which is sustainable production, which the second half covers a good demo of the tool. So that should get you sort of up and running on that. So I'm just going to wrap up. Thank you so much to Traci, Nicolas, and Ella for joining me for this session. It's great to be a part of the summit this year and to hear sort of about your experiences so far. I'm very glad to hear they were all complimentary. I'll pay you guys later. So if I may leave the audience, just with some things to consider, it would be to think about how you could implement low carbon methods into your production process, both as individuals and as organisations. We really want you to feel inspired. So please do sign up for the training and encourage your colleagues and suppliers to do the same. And with that, I will hand back to Geeta.